Right, take it away, Joanne.
So I'm going to introduce Andy. Andy is the Executive Director of the LSIP, and Andy is going to introduce you to the first phase of the LSIP through the slides this afternoon.
Thank you, Jo, and great to see everybody, and thank you for inviting us along to give you a bit of an update on the work that we've been doing, and to allow us to kind of give you a little bit of in-depth kind of insight into the current kind of labour market information that we are seeing. So if we could move to the first slide, please. So for those of you that are kind of unaware of what the local skills improvement plan is, obviously a few years ago a number of white papers and pieces of legislation kind of appeared that talked about having skills planning at a much more local level, so at a county level. So the government kind of embarked on this process of having local skills improvement plans. The kind of concept travels across the 38 areas of the country. So if you go and search for LSIPs, you'll find there are 38 of them across the country, and the notion was that they would be an attempt to kind of put skills planning a little bit more into the hands of employers. I think there's been this long held kind of feeling that that possibly employers, you know, they have a specific need, but the system can't meet that need. So if you start to plan around from an employer's perspective, you'll get a much better kind of, you know, skills and labour market out there. I have to say, you know, having a skills plan that's been created by employers is one answer. It isn't the only answer to what we need. You know, employers may want something completely different to, say, the local levelling up agenda, for example. So it is just one kind of take on what we need to have in place. But the government say very, very keen to put it in the hands of employers. So they commissioned ERBs, so there'll be an acronym test at the end of this. So employer representative bodies to undertake the work and to come up with the plans. And across most of the country, that they are the local chambers of commerce. There are a couple of FSBs and 2 or 3 other kind of sector bodies, but generally they have been put together by the local chambers of commerce. So if you just flick to the next kind of slide, please. So within the kind of phase, in order to come up with the local skills improvement plan, we had about 9 months. So it was a 9-month piece of work. So we started just before Christmas. So we started November. If you can imagine, kind of nothing really happens in that last phase before Christmas and then over Christmas. So kind of got going in January in the kind of reach out phase. And we felt in that phase that we managed to contact about 750 employers and stakeholders through the kind of outreach phase. And the outreach phase probably lasted about 3 months. So kind of January, February, March. By the end of March, we had then to issue the colleges with the set of priorities that they used in their local agreements with the DfE. So you got a series of stats there about the kind of things we did, but most of the engagement activity we undertook was either direct surveying of employers, of which we used a telemarketing company to help support that, or roundtable events with employers and the providers, just to kind of gather, you know, the intelligence required to kind of write the report. So if we can just go to the next slide, please. So the local skills improvement plan that you can find on the Chamber's website there, it pretty much the kind of format you've got down there on the left-hand side, that was prescribed by the Department for Education. So they pretty much said, this is how we want the report to be. And they also said they needed to have 2 additional annexes to go with the report. One of which was about the local kind of context, and then the second annex was about the process that you followed in order to do the report. We've produced a 3rd annex as well, so we have 3 annexes sitting with our report, and the 3rd annex is a data pack that's got about 80 pages of data in it, that we plan to update every 6 months. So that's probably quite a useful place to go. There'll be the same graphs each, or with updated content, but we'll update the content every 6 months. So probably a good place to go and have a look each time we do an update to see what's kind of changed. But it's as you would expect, you know, the usual bits in the report, you know, I don't know, an entry and exit bit, the priorities bit, how you're going to take it forwards, what your kind of roadmap that is to kind of achieve that. And that was the first phase of doing the LSIP. That 9-month phase eventually kind of concluded with the report being written and validated by the Secretary of State and then loaded to our website and onto the DfE's website for the early part of August. We then bid to run, and were successful in that bid to run the second part of the Local Skills Improvement Plan framework, which is now a 3-year kind of monitoring phase to support the implementation of the plan as we go forwards for that kind of 3 years. So just want to flick to the next slide, please. So in all of the stuff that I talk about at the start of this front end of the webinar, I'm going to kind of do what we've done as far as the Local Skills Improvement Plan priorities, and then Joe will carry on with some more general labour market information. But if you want to look at anything in the front end of this PowerPoint, this to me is probably the most important slide. Okay, lots of words on there, and we'll share the slides with everybody afterwards, so you've got, you know, chance to kind of digest it and then come back to us afterwards again if you've got any specific problems. But through the outreach work that we did with employers and providers and stakeholders, we identified a series of priorities that were important to Essex, so to Essex, Southend and Thurrock, and we split that into 3 areas. So we've got skills priorities, kind of skills system priorities, and then the sectors and technical skills that were important. So if we start with the first set there, the skills priorities, the first one there, I'm not always that keen on the term soft skills, but kind of work ready behaviours, soft skills. From all of the engagement activity that we did with employers, that was the #1 standout thing that everybody spoke about. Every single roundtable event that we did, everybody talked about more young people, but young people and adults being work ready at the point they get to work. But that wasn't about the technical skills that they were lacking. It was about those standard behavioural skills. And, you know, probably if we'd spoken about this pre-pandemic, we'd have said, you know, young people struggle with, I don't know, with confidence, with communication skills, with coming off their phones and everything else. And kind of post-pandemic, when we did this piece of research, you know, really strong kind of emphasis from employers talking about those soft skills. Next section on there, employers talked quite a lot. Again, no, it's just, sorry, slides, but yeah, talked about basic English and maths. So kind of applied English and maths, so not pure English and maths passing the exam, but actually using English and maths in context of that employment. So again, you know, kind of we're reaching out to providers about how they embed English and maths in their core curriculum rather than just do it as a kind of add-on to meet the condition of funding. Digital skills came out very strongly. So again, applied digital skills across all sectors. So this was about use of electronic equipment in all sectors. So it wasn't about just the digital sector. So for example, in healthcare, lots and lots of talk by healthcare providers about young people being able to use, analyze, interpret the data that they get from their digital equipment that they're using. Next one there, green skills. As you'd expect, green skills, very strong theme. In not only the kind of technical areas that do green, but in the kind of general notion of employers kind of wanting to attract staff, so being very conscious of their social responsibility and their need to be kind of green. So lots and lots of talk about kind of cross-cutting green skills. And then the final one there, leadership and management skills, was a nod to that first line of management. So you're very good at your job. 10 years later, you get promoted to be the supervisor or the manager, and you've got no skills at all in managing other people. So that, you know, leadership and management, but particularly that first line look at of becoming a manager. So then on to kind of skills system priorities. We kind of identified in the report that there isn't actually a skills planning system for Essex. If you go to Southend or if you go to Thurrock, they both have skills plans and working groups. Essex has a skills plan as a county, but it doesn't actually have a planning system or working group or anything to coordinate that. So that's something we've been tasked with looking at. System access and flexibility is a nod to the issues that a lot of employers talked about, where they're looking for things like unitised qualifications. They're looking for flexibility in use of funding. Information, advice and guidance, they're the third point down there. Again, second thing that any employer spoke about in a roundtable event was about schools and was about that kind of seamless flow of advice and guidance. And, you know, they were quite joined up and quite positive in the way they talked about careers advice and guidance, because a lot of them, when they're talking about, for example, the logistics sector, they were actually sitting there talking about how do we kind of make the logistics sector, you know, really appeal to young people, primary school, secondary school, because actually as a term, logistics doesn't really mean much to anybody. So how to try and kind of make their own sectors stand out as a pipeline for workforce. Next one there, inclusive employment. That's a nod to kind of not only people with additional needs, but also what employers were talking about is they were talking about having to go to unusual labour markets to attract staff. So they were attracting staff from labour markets, and they'd recruit them and they'd get them in, and then the employer didn't have the skills to kind of support them. So that included not only high needs, that included people, you know, whose English isn't their first language, people from areas of deprivation where drugs and alcohol, you know, are rife, domestic violence and so on. So there's an area of the LSIP around that. Barriers to engagement, the bottom one on that particular list just talked about the issues of how you support people into kind of post-16 learning. So things like transport costs, childcare costs, you know, the issues of rurality that we kind of face as a bit of a mixed economy county. And then onto those sectors that you've got there, those were the sectors that came out through our research as the key kind of priority sectors from not only employers, but the other improvement plans that are around each of the kind of, you know, skills plans. So lots of talk about, a lot of them you'd expect to see for Essex, I think, engineering, manufacturing, construction, creative, digitech, healthcare and professional. I think they're standard ones you'd expect, but there's a couple of unusual ones on there. We didn't start off this journey with education on there as a priority sector, but from the CELEP data, the second highest area of vacancies when we did this piece of research was in education. And realistically, to me, you can't have a skills plan if you haven't got anybody to teach anything. So education was added on as a sector. And we also added on community and voluntary as a sector, because in some of the areas of deprivation, particularly the coastal communities that we've got, we found that there was a really real strong link with community and voluntary and the kind of routes into employment for that. So if you can just flick to the next slide, please. So there's also a section, I won't dwell on this too long, but there's a section in the report that talks about how we're now going to implement this. So this next kind of 3-year phase of working on the LSIP and supporting other stakeholders around to achieve some of the priorities that we've set out within the report. So there's a section on that within the report. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. And then, as I said, there is a data and intelligence pack that will be updated every, well, twice a year. You know, we did the first one that we did was done in about June, so that's starting to get a little bit long in the tooth. And Joe is going to go through a little bit of the updated data from that pack with you in a few seconds. But I think it's actually quite a useful repository of different types of information. It does pull together things like, you know, your apprenticeship starts and completions. It talks about, you know, trends in employment. It talks about stakeholders. It talks about, you know, the kinds of things that employers are asking for in job adverts and that kind of stuff. So really, really useful kind of document. I'm hoping for you to have a look at afterwards. If we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so those are the sectors that are within the data pack. It also includes in there our employer feedback. So we had about 450 responses to our questionnaire over the 8 weeks from employers across the county, a lot of which were from SMEs, and very often SMEs and the needs of SMEs are very different to those of, you know, large companies that have got training departments and everything else, for example, could engage with the apprenticeship levy and the other parts of the system, but SMEs of, you know, 10 or below or 5 or, you know, kind of micro below 5 actually really struggle to engage with the system. The system is just too complicated for them, and that came through very strongly in that employer feedback, which you'll find in that last part of the data pack. So just the next slide, please. Before I kind of hand over to Joe to give you a flick through the graphs and everything, current priorities that we're working on then as far as the local skills improvement plan for the next phase, the employment and skills board there is that nod to not having a skills planning system for the whole of Essex. So we're in the process of taking the LSIP board and recreating that into a skills planning board that will have subgroups. It has representatives from, you know, from the career service, from DWP, from the colleges, from the independent training providers and so on it. We're dovetailing that into the end of the local enterprise partnership model that sits around. So the government's confirmed that the timeline for the LEP will disappear at the end of March. So that means that all the infrastructure that goes with it will disappear. So things like the skills advisory panel, if you've heard about it, there's also a major projects group that sits within CELEP, and things like that will all disappear at the end of March. So we're in the process of attempting to kind of help recreate those with Essex County Council, Southend and Thurrock. We're working on the devolution piece. You may be aware that the Essex looks like it's going to get granted a level 2 devolution deal. That's maybe not what everybody wanted, certainly not what the employers wanted, but at least with a level 2 devolution deal, you will get some form of devolution of the adult skills budget. So locally, you'll be able to hand out and work on where the priorities are and where you want to spend the money for the adult skills budget. We're obviously working on the action plan that we've produced. We've just commenced doing a series of sector deep dives in each of the identified sectors. So we're starting with logistics. So we've done all of the data work behind the scenes for logistics as a sector. Slightly struggled, maybe it's fatigue before Christmas with the kind of survey in the logistics sector. So we're going to do a roundtable logistics to try and feed in a few more ideas in that particular sector. And then we'll work through each of the other 9 identified areas around those sector deep dives. I talked about the labour market intelligence that we're going to update. We'll update that in January for our 6th monthly update. And we've also just started to do a series of business and provider engagement events, and we're starting with an engagement event with logistics after Christmas, and I think we've got engineering scheduled in for National Apprenticeship Week as well. So we've got 2 of those scheduled in, ready to do. So that's the kind of current work that we're doing. And if you can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to hand over seamlessly to Joe now. I've sadly got to leave for another event, so I'll hand over to Joe. So Joe's going to take you through some graphs on various bits of labour market intelligence and information that we think will be useful to you, and then she's happy to take questions at the end of that. So I'll part company with you, but I'll leave you in Joe's capable hands. So over to you, Joe.
Oh, lovely. Thanks, Andy, and thank you for a nice insight to all of the work that we've been doing. Could we go on to the next slide, please? I think what we wanted to be able to say right at the beginning is, you know, the data that we are producing is data. We're going to replicate the data pack that is already in the LSIP, and we're going to update that every 6 months. But this stuff is not set in stone. So if you, from your conversations, feel that there is data that's missing that you could benefit from, please do let us know, because we are looking at evolving the data that we provide. And that's something that's a very clear steer from the Department of Education, that whilst the LSIP report was produced, you know, in the early part of the summer, the actions will evolve over time, and therefore the data that we provide may need to change. So please do let us know if there's something that you're missing. So the first slide here, we were just going to give you an example of some of the data that's in the data packs. And when we look at the data, we are looking at Greater Essex. So it does everything that we refer to, you know, does include Southend and does include Thurrock. And we will cut that data and show the districts within each one of the Greater Essex areas, so as to provide you as much granular detail as you possibly can need. And equally, we will then cross-cut that data through to sectors. So when you are looking at the data, when you are talking to employers, when you're talking to schools, you should have some really content-rich data that you could maybe refer to over a period of time. So the slide here is an example of what is available in the data pack. If you could move on to the next slide. Thank you. There's another example of how we are cutting the data. What we thought was really important was to give you some context as to where Essex sits within the United Kingdom and also within the east of England. So wherever possible, we are trying to benchmark ourselves against other areas so we can see whether we're bucking the trend or whether we're below the trend. So again, allowing us to have some real meaningful conversations with our schools, with our colleges. What I'd like to add before we start going into some real granular detail is this data, we are taking this data through to the colleges and the independent training providers. We know that this is a really important aspect of curriculum development. So not only are we having conversations and continue to have conversations with employers who are providing us with anecdotal evidence of what skill shortages they require, the information that we are able to then take to colleges is allowing colleges to be able to respond appropriately to what courses they develop for subsequent years. So I'll give you an example. We have met with South Essex College. We are planning to meet all of the other colleges over the next couple of weeks and helping them understand, what does the data mean? Actually, what does that, how will they interpret that data to be able to think about the qualifications that they are planning? So if they're seeing data changes within wards within their boroughs rather than the Essex County data as a whole, what does that mean? Should they change how they deliver qualifications? Should they change what they deliver? And whether they should be remote, whether they should be modular. So we are trying to support colleges to be able to understand the data. And again, hopefully you'll be able to look at this data and take from it some interpretations. But if there are any questions following on from any data packs, we are here. We aren't, Candy Floss Towers in any way, shape or form. We really want to engage with everybody and to be able to provide some context around the data that we are producing. And for this meeting, we have produced data that sits out of the normal data pack. So if you find that this is beneficial, we can absolutely repeat this activity and draw out information that's perhaps more appropriate to the audience that you're taking this to. If we can have the next slide, please. Again, this is another one of the example slides. So what we are looking at is the skills that employers are looking for. So over time, what we want to be able to do is measure the change and the trends that are taking place within the data. So the example of the slide that you are seeing here is the slide that is already in the data pack. We are updating the data pack and it should be live in January, and hopefully some of those messages that sit beyond the data, you'll be able to see some of the data trends. If you can go through to the next slide, please. Fabulous. And then if we can just flick through to the next one, I want to get us to the data that we produced. Here we go. So this is something that we've produced over the last couple of weeks. So what we can see within all of the counties, we've broken it down by ward within Essex, and that we have an ageing population, and that really is influencing our employment levels and wage levels. We can see that we are above the national average of people that are within 65 plus, but it's only in Tendring and Malden and Castle Point that we have that higher national average of residents that are 65 plus, and Tendring has a population more than Harlow and Thurrock. So the reason that's really important is, who are we targeting qualifications to? Who are accessing the labour market within each one of those boards, each one of those wards? And again, we are taking that through to the colleges so they can really understand the granular level of detail that sits behind the ward that relates to them, so they can provide the most appropriate information, advice and guidance, and also the qualifications that they will be delivering. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is a really, really important slide, and it's really hard to be able to articulate. So we've tried to simplify the data as easily as we could. So we're looking at the most deprived areas within the county of Essex, and 10% fall within the most deprived area. Now, what the percentages relate to, so I'm just going to use the top line for Basildon as an example. 18% of the wards within Basildon fall within a deprived area of income. 7% of the wards within Basildon fall within the deprivation linked to employment. And then when you look at 19% of the wards within Basildon, they fall between the lowest area of education, skills and training. Now, there could be a range of why they fall within that. It could be that they don't have the highest level of qualifications, or it could be that they just don't have any qualifications at all. But we thought we would extract this data, so it actually gives you some really clear understanding of the variations that we are experiencing, not only within the county of Essex, but how we apply the conversation to those skills, and particularly for you guys when you're having those conversations with your schools, you know, and you're providing that information, advice and guidance. One area that, again, using Basildon as an example, we know that employment in Basildon is high, but we know that employment in areas of entry point roles, that is also high. So the fact that people have got multiple jobs in Basildon in low education areas means that they aren't able to access skills and qualification. So it could be that the employment rate is impacting on the education and skills uptake within Basildon. So it's really what we may do within the deep dives within the sector areas. We will drill further into that detail, and we will start to extract some of this information so it's better understood as to why people within those sector areas are not picking up on qualifications, or why they're finding it hard to access employment, or why they're falling below, you know, certain income levels. And it may be that we find out that they're in entry level roles, they're being paid minimum wage, so on and so forth. So those deep dives will impact, and you will see this, you know, we will extract and extrapolate on this data. If you can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've broken down employment by occupation. So this is not split across the county in the wards. This is purely by occupation. So we can see that we've got a high proportion of jobs in Essex, and we've seen an increase of 36,000 jobs since 2019. So we know that the labour market is really strong in Essex. We know that we are seeing that employers are coming in, and that they are, one of the things that they report to us all the time is that they are struggling to be able to attain labour. So we believe that labour is going out into London and coming in from the north. So we're seeing it coming from Ipswich down and labour coming in. So we know that the labour market, as I say, is strong, but being able to reskill and upskill is going to be critically important because of the jobs that are available. We can see that they're hiring construction and transport storage. That really makes sense when you think about the work and the development that is taking place and the infrastructure projects that are starting to take place within those particular areas. And we know that food services, information, communication, education, and arts and recreation, we have a really rich set of employers within the particular area of Essex. Equally, we know because we have got Stansted and we know that we've got Southend and the ports that come in from Harwich and Tilbury, that does impact on the jobs and the labour that's coming into the county. We know that there is a huge amount of growth, particularly within those port areas and with those airport areas. So we are likely to continue to see the growth in those areas. Of course, we can just see the high number of accommodation and food services is linked to those coastal areas, Tendring and Southend. So again, when you are taking this information back, you should be able to see some of those trends that may be able to affect the schools that you are working with and therefore the advice and guidance that you are able to provide. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so again, we've broken this down by timelines. So we can see that we have a big proportion of employed rather than self-employed within the county. And there's been a sharp decrease of self-employed within the county since the pandemic. Now that's quite significant. I think people were self-employed. They've obviously gone back. You know, they want the safety of being in a job. But we can see that it contrasts against 60,000 people that are now employed. So again, you can see the trends and how this is moving over the last couple of years. Levels of employment within Essex have seen an increase of 4% since 2013, and we do remain consistent. When you look at this data, we sit at around about 78%, and that's across the county. So we've got a strong labour market. Whilst we have peaks and troughs in some areas, we know that overall the labour market is incredibly strong in Essex. And with hopefully, she says, if we have the sign off for some of the large major infrastructure projects, we are going to see that increase over the next couple of years. Next slide, please. Employment rate by local authority. Again, we thought this was really important. I'm not going to go through too much of the detail because this is a really busy slide here, but we thought it was really important for you to be able to see when each one of the boroughs where we have the highest level of employment and where the growth sits. So again, you are able then to relate this data back to the conversations that you are having. And also relating this information to the colleges, we are taking this data to them so they can plan appropriately where they believe the most appropriate courses are, whether they be study programme courses or whether they be adult programme courses. We had a conversation today. You know, we've met with Department of Education and we're talking about higher technical qualifications versus T-levels versus apprenticeships. And it's really important that we have this data so we can start to translate the development of those qualifications with those colleges to ensure that the most appropriate programmes are being aligned to the areas where we think there is going to be the most uptake and the most need. Next slide, please. Again, we've broken it down by self-employed rate, and I think this is really important when we are providing, you know, advice and guidance to folk looking to enter the labour market. It's really important for them to understand, you know, barriers to employment, what does self-employment need, and where there is the highest self-employment link to local authority. Now, what we will be doing again in those deep dives that we're doing by sector, we will also focus on self-employment versus employment, because you are likely to see that come out in a higher proportion of maybe some of the areas in which digital, the gig technology, all of those different things. So over the next few weeks, we particularly the logistics sector and the construction sector, they are coming out within the next couple of months. We will start to unravel this data for you even further, so you can understand completely how self-employed and employed relates by each sector. Next slide, please. Again, by band size, I think it's really important that we are able to show you how many businesses we have within the local authority and within their band sizing. This is so important, particularly when we are talking about employer engagement, when we are looking at schools that are thinking about employer engagement, and how we plan that in employer engagement. If we have the vast majority of our businesses that are falling into the micro category, we know that it is going to be a real challenge for them to be able to work with us, because they probably don't have huge amounts of time available for us, to be like in the same way that large or medium-sized organisations are able to do. This helps me, particularly when we are talking to colleges in how to engage, and schools in how to engage with employer engagement, to bring them into schools on work-related activities, or equally for them to be able to advertise and showcase their own apprenticeships. I was at a roundtable event with some professional employers. They came from the HR sector and accounting sector, and they said, actually, we collectively have lots of small vacancies, but we want to be able to behave as a group when talking to a school and when talking to a college, because we then get a better response as an employer group than we would if we were to work individually. So by understanding this data, we as an LSIP team can work more closely with employers and perhaps create some solutions that add value to the schools and to the colleges, to be able to have a better integration with those organisations within those particular areas. What we will do, again, going back to the deep dives, we will then relate this information to ward and also to the sector. So you will be able to see within those particular wards how many of those small organisations fall within the logistics sector, fall within the retail sector. So it's really important to understand the granularity of this detail and how it can support with our conversations. Next slide, please. Enterprise by local authority. So what we've seen, again, we've broken down all of those organisations. We know that the pandemic has caused a slight dip in the growth of new business, and we know that Colchester and Thurrock has not really recovered in the same way. So I'm not going to read all of those details out to you, but what we're trying to show you is how those organisations, the ebb and flow of those organisations, so you are able to provide some really strong advice to those seeking enrolment in those particular areas, so you can understand better the way that organisations and way that business is recovering over the next couple of months. And again, without repeating myself, with those deep dives, we will start to really drill into the detail and show this by each sector. So you'll not only have the wards, you will be able to see that sector related information. Next slide, please. Again, closures, we thought it was really important for you to be able to see how many organisations were closing. I think sometimes we talk through anecdotal information, we potentially can talk through fear, that is the retail sector recovering, is the hospitality sector recovering. What we wanted to be able to show is clear evidence of where we can see closures are taking place, the volume of closures that are taking place, And what we will continue to do is drill into the sector related information so you are able to inform those that you will be talking to around the particular areas and sectors that are affected in that current space of time. We will be updating this data every 6 months because we feel that this is really fluid data at the minute, and we know with the economic challenges that we are all facing, the organisations, there is excuse me, a certain lack of stability at this time. So we could see a little bit of movement around this, so we will be updating this regularly. Next slide, please. This information, if when you look through this information, it would be really interesting to get some feedback from you all over the next couple of weeks to tell us which slides really add value, which slides actually you perhaps don't need. We thought it was really important to be able to show you, you know, salary by area, by resident, by workplace. Again, for that to provide some really indicative information around, you know, if you were to work in this area, what's the average salary and how does that link to all of the different sectors. So we tried to cut as much information and provide it for you. We feel that this is really important information, particularly when you're entering the labour market. But again, feedback from that data would be really helpful. And what we will do, again, when we do those sector deep dives, I think it will be really important to understand how they relate per sector. So over time, we will have some really rich data that you will be able to use, and all of this will be circulated, but it will also be updated on our website. Next slide, please. Adult qualifications. This is really, really important, and more important because we know that devolution is coming to Essex. Whether it comes to Essex this year is yet to be seen, you know, whether the Devo 2 deal is signed off, but we do know that it's coming, and we do know that in a Devo 2 deal that the adult education budget is the money that will be secured within that deal. So understanding the qualification level within each one of the wards and understanding the challenge we face as a result of people being able to access those qualifications is going to be really important. And equally is important for those colleges that are looking to be able to, and independent training providers being able to develop those qualifications. So it'll be interesting to get some feedback as to whether this slide is really having an impact on some of the conversations that you are having with all of your areas, where you can see the benchmarks are. It's to add to that, I think it's, you know, I'm not sure if any of you are aware, but there wasn't an independent training provider in Essex that was successful with their adult education budget bid in Essex. So we only have a non-procured adult education budget in Essex. So that could be skewing, and we may see the trend of these qualifications change quite significantly as a result of the fact that we have no procured budget within Essex. And again, is something that we are taking as a conversation when we're talking to those folk that are developing the Devo 2 deal, and also that AEB funding that will come through. So again, your feedback on this slide will really help us inform conversations that we're having with the Department of Education, Essex County Council and Greater Essex. Next slide, please. Apprenticeship. This one is close to my heart. You know, I've been 25 years in the apprenticeship sector. So you can see that the apprenticeship achievement rate within the sectors listed are no surprise. We have a high proportion of business administration achievement. We know that there always is within that sector. When you look at the achievement rates per qualification, you probably get a higher proportion of distinctions within those sectors. You can also see that health and public services and care, we have a high proportion of achievement rates. Again, that's no surprise because they are mandated qualifications within those sectors. So you can see the achievement rates are much lower by sector, probably because the uptake of that sector is not as much. But a really interesting statistic to look through. If you can go through to the next slide, please. What we've broken down here, and this is a really busy slide, so I'm not going to go through it because I can barely read the lines here, but we've broken it down by sector and by subject area and also by local authority. So you will be able to see that within the particular wards that you service, how many of those qualifications relate to you. Now, I think the apprenticeship sector is a real measure of how buoyant the labour market sector is within those particular areas, because the apprenticeships the uptake of those apprenticeships is often a sign of where the apprenticeship sector is doing really well and where the labour market is doing really well, and also where the demand for skills sits. So it probably would be useful to take some time to have a look through the wards that are relevant to you and how you are able to extract that data. And again, with all of those deep dives, we will be drilling into some real significant detail here, where we will be looking at qualifications, but perhaps going into multiple levels of qualifications within those sectors to how they relate to the labour market. Next slide, please. We're getting to the end of it, so sorry if this felt a little bit like death by PowerPoint. We thought we'd be really give you a bit of an overview from 22 to 23. So we know that we've had a high proportion of vacancies from, you know, a reasonably low proportion of employers. Our average salary within the county is 29 grand. That's a good, strong salary as an average salary. We can see, no surprise, the biggest companies that are recruiting. So the NHS being the top of the pile. Again, no surprise, the NHS is the biggest employer in England. And then the jobs that are advertised. Now, I found this incredibly surprising. So the highest proportion, chefs, cleaners, domestics, warehouse operatives, registered nurses, sales and retail assistants. So when we go into the deep dives, we will extract this slide and we will put it into the deep dive. So you will be able to see the roles more specifically within each one of those sectors. But I thought this was just a really useful overview of the county. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've come to the end of all of the slides. What you can see here is a link to the LSIP, to the report, to all of the annexes that Andy referred to in the report. You just click onto the Essex Chambers of Commerce and you can see along the bottom there is LSIP. So there will be a hyperlink that's sent out, but equally if you go onto the website, you will be able to find all of that information there. I just wanted to finish before we end to talk about the work that we are doing. So Andy kind of went through all of the planning that took place and all of the stages that will be undertaken to provide the governance and continue to do that work, you know, to be able to create the solutions. I think in its simplest term, the LSIP will continue to engage with employers. Employers will continue to tell us what they need. And through the work that we are doing with all of the local authorities, with the colleges and with the independent training providers, we will try to shape the skills system so it does exactly what it needs to do, and hopefully be able to provide better tailored training programs that either allow 16 to 18-year-olds to go into further education to be better prepared for the world of work, or will provide the world of work the opportunities for their workforce to be reskilled and upskilled in qualifications that are appropriate for them. So I continue to be out talking to employers all of the time, trying to create solutions, and I'll give you and leave you with one example of that. We have brought together the NHS across the county. This isn't something that's been done before. So there are anchor points around the county, but they all kind of work within their own boards, as you would imagine, to be able to target those particular areas. And we know that in the north of the county, as opposed to the south of the county, or vice versa, they will be doing things brilliantly and they may not be replicated. So we are bringing that group together as an organisation to say, how can we better service the county of Essex, and how can we better apply all of that best practice to all of the particular areas? So whether that is about engaging with schools, whether that's about engaging with colleges, or developing T-levels, or developing higher technical qualifications, or work experience, all of those good things, we're bringing that together as a collective group. And whilst it's not listed as a priority group and a sector in the priority report, we believe that it is a sector that is significant for Essex. So we wanted to bring that together so we can add further value to the schools and colleges and providers around the county. And on that, I'll leave you, and thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you so much, Jo. I want to go back and look at all those graphs again.
Yeah, there's a lot of data in there.
Looking all that stuff. It's really interesting. Thank you so much for presenting. See if we've got any questions. No, anyone got any questions? Nothing in the chat.
I think they're all bamboozled by the data.
Well, I think there's a lot to digest there, and it takes time to really unpick it. And I think that could be a task for us to do in the Careers Hub as well. We can really look into that and make it easily digestible for our schools, and look at it at really focused local level as well.
And I think that's the feedback that we are seeking. We are on the early journey, aren't we? We're only really 10 weeks in to the approved local skills improvement plan. So we've put together a set of data, but actually we are reaching out and saying, there will be more things that will add value. How do you want us to cut this data? Because we've got the resource to be able to do it, and because we need the data to be meaningful and not just a slide deck for the purpose of a slide deck. We really want it to add value. So we welcome any feedback or any requests for something different and something new. We would be happy to provide.
That'd be really helpful. I will put these slides up on the Careers Hub website. It will be in the same place that you booked to come today. So I'll upload those straight after this finishes. Thank you so much, Jo. Before you all go, I want to show you something that's going to be helpful to you. If you haven't seen already, we've got a whole load of new labour market resources that are on our website to be used in lessons. So I'll just show you now where you can find them and what they look like. I don't want to do that again. I want to show you hold on. Can't work out how to. I know if I close that. Sorry, it's 5 o'clock now. Brain not working anymore. Get rid of that. Right. Should be able to show you that. Can you see my webpage now? If you go on to the schools and colleges, here we have there's two things that relate to this really. There's the Where Next, and then there's district labour market posters. So on this page, these come out a few weeks ago. There are posters to go with every district that have got data on them, which directly relates to what Joe was going over, growth sectors, data around employment and unemployment. There's one per district. They can be downloaded as PDFs. Really useful to use in your conversations with your young people, but also to put up around your school or college. We've also got new resources that were just put up this week, and these accompany our Where Next booklet, which came out last year. We'll go back down here. This one, remember that one? I know that it's popular, lots of people are still using it. These resources accompany that booklet. So what we have is a series of PowerPoints that are 15-minute tutorial type lessons. Let me show you that one. This is within the tutorials, they cover every year group in one PowerPoint. If I go back to the beginning, well, that wasn't very well planned. But so example, green jobs and logistics for year 11. It's got some conversation points, so easy to start off a tutorial, discussion to be had around comparing these two different industries, both growth sectors within Essex. Within this PowerPoint, it goes up from year 7 all the way up to year 13, all in one PowerPoint. So in colleges, you can kind of use them depending on the level that your learners are at. And then to accompany that, we've got lessons. If I go back here, this is the tutorials, which are about 15 minutes long. Then we've got 1 hour lessons, PowerPoint and lesson plan to go with each of the 8 sectors. And if we just look at the green skills, because it is Green Skills Week, this, I'm going to put them in the wrong order. This is one for Key Stage 4. You've got some discussion points, and then there's activity for learners to go off and research those different areas, clear instructions. There is a lesson plan to go with each one, very simple, easy to follow, and says the resources that are needed to go with them. So it all ties really nicely in with what's in the LSIP. That's where it all came from. So that's all there, ready to be used now. 8 sectors, Key Stage 3, 4 and 5 for every sector, and a 15-minute tutorial. So they are there to download. Please use them and have a look through, because there's so many and they're absolutely brilliant. Right, 17:01. Everyone's ready to go home. But thank you so much for attending. We'll upload everything, including the recording from today.